Good afternoon, everybody. We've had a great morning so far on our Society of Fellows Day, and we're about to begin a great afternoon. I hope everybody got their lunch and that you're wide awake and ready for what's going to be a terrific beginning to the afternoon. My name is Peter Reiling. I'm an Executive Vice President here at the Aspen Institute, and I want to begin our afternoon by telling you a bit about something called the Aspen Global Leadership Network. You've had a chance this morning to hear about some of the policy programs of the Aspen Institute doing their great work, and I want to talk about a global venture that we've been involved in now for well over a decade. Back in 1997, the Aspen Institute started a program that has really become one of the most important programs here, called the Henry Crown Fellowship Program. The idea behind this program was that it doesn't escape any of us when we pick up the newspapers in the morning that we face so many challenges, whether it's our education system or our healthcare system, whether it's trying to figure out what to do with the environment, whether it's trying to figure out what to do about creating jobs in our country and around the world. These challenges are out there. And at the very beginning, as we began the Henry Crown Fellowship Program, the thought was, we know that these challenges seem to be growing in number and complexity. And we know that there's lots of good people working on them. And yet we seem to have a sense that these challenges are getting away from us. We know that the government is doing its part to try and address things like our education challenge or our healthcare challenge. We know that there's a remarkable array of great nonprofit organizations out there trying to do things. We know that many corporations in America and around the world are lending their talent and their energies trying to tackle some of these challenges, but still we felt there seems to be a gap here. And the idea in creating this fellowship was to attract a new sort of talent into this space of addressing some of the great challenges that face the world today. Who is this talent? Well, we're looking for great entrepreneurs, primarily business entrepreneurs, under the age of 45, who've proven that they know how to be successful. They know how to create wealth. But we also know that these people are very good at being disruptors. They tend to look at classic business challenges in a different way, and they've come up with solutions that have disrupted their industries. And so what we're about with this Henry Crown Fellowship Program is trying to find those disruptors who've been so busy building their businesses that they haven't been focused on how they might apply their same disruptive energy to the social challenges that we face. So in essence, we're trying to recruit a new army to join all of those who are already trying to tackle some of the great challenges we find. How do we do this? Well, each year in the Henry Crown Fellowship Program, which continues to this day, we put out a request for nominations. And we generally get about 300 nominations of people who are, as I said, under 45, proven entrepreneurs, but who have reached, and this is a very important point that we ask our nominators to think about, who've reached an inflection point in their lives. Some of them have IPO'd their companies and they're trying to think what's next. Some of them have taken their businesses to a certain level and they're starting to say to themselves, well, I know I'm already serving on certain boards, I'm writing checks, I'm doing all those things, but I'd like to put some of myself, my heart, my particular talents into these challenges, and we look for those people. Out of our 300 nominees, we select a class of 20, what we call fellows, and we bring them together, and we say to them, look, we're going to give you a tremendous opportunity over the next 24 months to come together 4 times for a week each time, with a group of 19 others who are like you, who are successful, who are entrepreneurial, who think differently, and we're going to challenge you to think about and to talk amongst yourselves about how you might have a greater impact in the world, to do some thinking about your leadership, how you could stretch yourself in your leadership, to think about the kind of world you'd like to live in, to think about your legacy that you'd like to leave behind, and to go do something about it. And I think what's unique about this fellowship program is it's not just about coming to Aspen and sitting in our beautiful seminar rooms having conversations. It's about moving from thought to action and going out into the world and doing something. Well, among the early fellows, I am a Henry Crown Fellow, and I came in the second class of fellows in 1998. And among the early fellows, there were several who said this is a really interesting model, this idea of trying to find great entrepreneurs and spurring them to take on even more. And what happened was the Henry Crown Fellowship Program was recreated in different forms, both around the world and across the United States. So in some cases, we reached out into places like Africa and Central America and into India, into the Middle East, and most recently into China, to find these same sorts of business entrepreneurs and to challenge them to come up with new solutions. In other cases, we've decided to focus on particular areas like education. I mentioned, as we all know, we have a great challenge here in the U.S. in terms of trying to figure out how to create a public education system that gives every child an opportunity to a world-class education. And so we've convened a fellowship for what we call education entrepreneurs, people who are working in our public education system but thinking differently. We have another one for people involved in our challenges around the environment and the global environment. Anyone who's been to China recently can see that firsthand, what a challenge we face. And some of you know that I'm a guy who is, knock on wood, pretty healthy, but last time I went to China, I came back with walking pneumonia, having made the mistake of going running in the morning and just realizing that what I was inhaling there was not good for my lungs. And I look at China as just a cautionary tale, I think, for many of us about what happens when we forget to think about the impact of economic growth without thinking about the impact on the environment. But to make a long story short, you heard me say that each year we select 20 Henry Crown Fellows, and as we've recreated these fellowships around the world, well, we continue to stay focused on groups of 20, sometimes 22 or 24, no larger. But here we stand today with 1,600 fellows in 46 countries, 80 classes of fellows who've been brought together and challenged to step up, to step out of their comfort zones, and to say, I am passionate about problem X, Y, or Z, and I am going to do something about it. And so what we're going to do now for the next 45, 50 minutes or so is get involved in a conversation with three of our fellows who've come to join us from as far away as Mississippi and as near as India and Central America. And so these are not just three ordinary fellows. These are winners of the John P. McNulty Prize. And Anne is sitting right here in front of me. And this was a prize that was created by Anne and her family in the memory of her husband, John, to recognize those fellows within the Aspen Global Leadership Network who have taken that daring entrepreneurial step to tackle some of the great challenges of our time. Amit, Bhatia, who you'll meet in a moment, was last year's winner of the John P. McNulty Prize. Unfortunately, he was named and was to be coming to New York City to be feted by us all, and Hurricane Sandy struck. And so we didn't have a chance to properly congratulate and to welcome Amit and to give everybody a chance to get to know him. So we're delighted you're here. And with Bill Bynum and with Hildegard Vasquez, you're going to meet two of our finalists for the John P. McNulty Prize. And so, without any further ado, I'm going to turn over to Anand Giridharadas, who is one of our Henry Crown Fellows. He's a wonderful guy. He's a writer for the New York Times. He's written a great book called India Calling, which I highly recommend, and he's just finished the manuscript on a new book. I'm sure we'll be doing a book talk for him soon. But Anand, let me hand over to you.
Well, thank you all for being here. It's always tough to go after lunch because people's energy levels sag a little bit. So we chose particularly fun people for this panel to compensate. Every time I come to one of these Aspen things, and you have the board kind of cabal in that room, and trustees floating around in the bathroom, and fellows in here, I'm always reminded of that John Kennedy line, except adapted for us, it's never has there been so much wealth and power in one building since Vladimir Putin's bath last night. So it's great to have this excellent group here and a terrific panel that I want to introduce to you. And I will tell you a bit about what they do right now very quickly, but will really kind of surface it through the conversation. To my immediate right is Amit Bhatia, as Peter mentioned. He's the founder of Aspire, which trains students across India with the language, soft skills, some hard skills as well that they need to get jobs, but that their schools fail to teach them, to try to get into that gap between people who finish school in many cases but are still unemployable. To Amit's right is Hildegard Vasquez, who runs an architecture practice in Panama, but also in her spare time, because that's how she rolls, has established a vocational academy for women called Capacitación para el Trabajo. I took French in high school. So. And Bill, to Hildegard's right, runs the Hope Community Credit Union, which uses finance actually to make people's lives better, which is an interesting concept here on the East Coast. And they work across the Delta region of Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Tennessee, so that people have more than blues to sing about down there. Now, all of you are examples of, and I think a lot of the people in this AGLN network are examples of people who work in this kind of in-between space that's not quite government, not quite NGOs, traditionally understood, not quite business with the traditional understandings of what businesses are supposed to optimize for. And all of you kind of operate in this area that I guess recognizes the failures of some of those other kinds of institutions to solve big problems and have tried to step in. I wonder, starting with you, Amit, and maybe quickly going down the line, what do you think are the kinds of problems that social enterprises can solve more of? And what are the kinds of things that actually you need good democracies and good governments to solve that cannot be solved privately?
I think that, and I'm going to have specifically the response with India in mind. I think in India we're dealing with large numbers. It's a 1.2 billion people country, 600 million people under the age of 25. So when you're looking at big problems, whether it's healthcare or education, we do need a new sector beyond private and public and NGO and PPP, as we call public-private partnership, the social enterprise sector, to go in so that you can solve some of the people's problem with the heart and soul, which can't just happen with policy making in White House. And some of this involves people like us being out there in territories which are hard to get to. So you have to do work in Kashmir, which is hard to get to, or in Northeast India, and that requires a passion which is not easily found in some of our traditional sectors. So that's an important need that the social enterprises are kind of fulfilling, that while they may have metrics which are financial and what does it cost to go solve the problem, but do it with heart and soul so you can actually connect with the beneficiary.
And what can't you do that you need to have a good government to do, or can everything be solved by social enterprise?
No, I think clearly government has a role to out there, and we should not allow government to abdicate their responsibility just because they are social entrepreneurs willing to step forward and undertake. I think having said that, government is going to, in India as probably around the world, will have an important part to say, hey, how do we use so much taxpayers' dollars to continue to address this thing? But they cannot get everywhere, and they do not have either the infrastructure or like I said, the heart and soul to address problems in small towns and villages and rural areas. And that's where social enterprises step in. And I think that's an important part to play, because the moment you start addressing neighborhoods, cities, towns, that can where you can solve these problems, you have economic effect in the larger country, that creating more of the consumption economy which India is getting known for, but that wouldn't happen but for these enterprises.
Hildegard, tell us about Panama. What's the line beyond which the government has to do it and no one else can do it, and before which private people can do it like yourselves?
I think for us it's a question of difference in how effective institutions are in relationship to small. I think India is big, Panama is small. But in the smallness is where change lies. And what I'm going to explain is, when we go into the urban, poor women, we realize the violence, the level of disengagement that there is, the lack of empathy that there is in the population. The government is not doing that. They're thinking big, they're thinking numbers, they're saying we are educating so many or doing so many, but they're not touching the person itself. And that's where private
They're creating
sec-
buildings.
Yeah, actually Panama is building everything they can build right now. I mean, Panama is going through a huge level of growth with a lot of government building, but they are not building people. So we're going to have this country with a lot of infrastructure and nobody to work it. I mean, we have hospitals and we don't have doctors. So how do you do that? And that's where the private sector has to come in.
Bill, what about in your area where there's a lot of private activity but government regulates it a lot? What can government uniquely do and what can people like you uniquely do?
It was interesting, Peter's description that people come from as far away as Mississippi, because in many ways Mississippi is disconnected from much of the United States. It has a unique legacy of race and poverty that I don't think exists anywhere else, and it's clear that systems, traditional systems that have been effective in other parts of the country have failed. In Mississippi, you've got significant parts of the population that suffer from lack of access to health care, access to quality education, educational attainment, medically underserved, poverty are all at extraordinarily high levels in Mississippi and across the Mid-South. And so it's critical that entities from the private sector, the nonprofit sector, step in and try to make the systems work for all the residents. If you look at the demographics across the country, particularly in the Mid-South, last year, half of all the children less than age 18 in Mississippi were children of color. The poverty level for African Americans in Mississippi is 49%. 64% of African Americans are unbanked or on the fringe of the banking system and don't have access to regular checking and savings accounts. They have to pay 400, 500% for payday predatory loans. And so something has to be done to close that gap. And that's a role that I think the private sector and social entrepreneurs are uniquely positioned to play.
And tell me, all of you have kind of different backgrounds in your own lives on this next question, but I go to you, Hildegard. How do you think about, in a lot of the fellows in the AGLN are on different sides of this question of, should you devote yourself full-time to your cause, quit what you do and do the cause, or make money, keep your platform, be big in whatever that platform that is, and then do this as a side thing? I'm curious how you navigated that in your own decision making.
Oh, I started thinking I was to devote 5% of my time to my project and 95% to being an architect. That's not true today. It's about 50-50, but I don't think you need to undermine each. For me, it's more of an urban project. I don't see the work I do with women as separate from the architecture I do. I do restoration in the old city. So I restore block by block a building the same way I restore block by block the lives of the families that make that community, and think about block by block then changing a country. And so if I leave one or the other, I can't make the mix, which is what I'm having right now. I'm having women that have gone through our program actually buy their own homes in the old city. So it's closing that circle, and I'm designing the homes. So in a way, I like the fact that I can affect so many levels.
Now, Amit, you did it differently. You worked in business, left everything, and now do this 140% of your time, from what I understand. How did you navigate that choice, whether to stay in the game or get out of it?
Well, I agree with Hildegard that it's not an either or. It's not that you can, the only model is devote 100% and that's the only kind of acid test of your passion. But I think in my case it was very clear. I'd spent several years at American Express, McKinsey, had built a company listed on NYSE. But the seminars that we went through were a very clear call to action, and the problems facing India are large. And one felt that if one could prove, not just to one's own self, but also to the community of fellows you have around you, that there are viable careers and there's great use of your time if you go beyond private sector and businesses and commit to some social causes and actually build for-profit enterprises in the social sectors, one would be able to kind of do better talent allocation. I remember, at one of the Act 2s, Bill Gates was talking about education, and he mentioned he had funded a guy called Sal Khan, who built the Khan Academy. And he said when Sal Khan left his Wall Street job to go do this, US had a way better allocation of how much IQ was there on Wall Street in one block and how much is getting really devoted to social causes. And I think that's true for all the countries, and especially developing countries like India, where we need way more talent in the social sector. So for me, it was a call that I have to go give 100% to focusing on employability in India. And 6 years later, I can say I have absolutely no regrets.
I think sometimes it's a mystery to people how reading a bunch of old things can make people change their lives as much as happens in this fellowship. Are there any particular reading, as you were about to have that epiphany, because I'm going to go read them immediately after this?
Well, I think the good thing is it is not about reading. I think what Aspen Institute is very good at is putting voices in your head. Voices of great texts, voices of great peoples, voices of your conscience, voices you often choose to ignore. And I think the fact that those voices stay with you long after you've left that seminar room is that you make some of these big calls. Because, as we joke all the time, it's a successful seminar is one where you walk out with more questions than you walked in with. And I think those are the questions that you seek answers to. And one of the answers I was seeking to, obviously, what's a life well led in my context in the India I'm growing up with.
Bill, I want to ask you to put on your visionary hat and imagine a bank of the future that is unburdened by all the constraints of what banks have been until now, unburdened by regulation, et cetera. I remember I once met a retired central bank chief who said, the whole crisis we're in is very simple. Banks used to be means to an end, and they understood that they were means and other people were the end. And then they started thinking of themselves as ends, and got into this mess. If we were to imagine an amazing new kind of bank that served people and remembered it was a means, what would it look like?
I think it'll look like Hope Credit Union.
This is like T-ball.
Yeah, come on, swing it. But seriously, I think since 2008, the world has changed dramatically. The financial sector is never going to be like it was before the economic crisis and the housing crisis, and we're seeing banks leave the retail banking in droves. Bank of America announced recently they're going to close 700 branches, and I'm sure those are going to be in many of the communities that resemble the ones that we're working to serve. Every few months I get a call from a small town mayor who's told me that the only bank in his town is closing. And it's not as if those people all of a sudden stop needing financial services, and they certainly can't afford to be preyed upon by high-cost predatory lenders. And so we've got to figure out ways to close the gap. And certainly bricks and mortar is expensive, personnel is expensive. I can't afford to open a branch in every mound bayou in Alligator, Mississippi. But that doesn't mean we can stop pushing the envelope. What we really are excited about is, there's been several discussions this morning about the use of technology. You'd be surprised that rural people, low-income people, people of color actually use smartphones, not just cell phones, but smartphones at a higher rate than the population as a whole. They don't use it typically for banking because they're not in the banking system by and large. But we're developing mobile apps, personal financial management software that helps people with budgeting and making smarter financial decisions. And we think that by using mobile apps to engage people in the banking system, partnering with local trusted advisors, nonprofits, social service agencies, their employers, we can bring more people into the banking system in a cost-effective way that closes the gap that we're seeing emerging across our region.
That's very interesting. Hildegard, I want to ask you, we were talking over email and you mentioned that this work of empowering women primarily through vocational training is hindered and complicated by larger social problems, as all of your work is. So you have issues of violence, you have issues of patriarchy and culture and the way people think about women. And as a social entrepreneur, how much can you solve on your own, and how much do you need to kind of also work on cultural change and influence men and those kinds of things?
Men are a difficult part of the whole mix.
I think the rest of us on this panel would agree.
I won't disagree.
I always thought men were simple, but this is actually refreshing.
The only way we're going to change the men is if we start a generation before. And what I mean is, the ones already happening or living in violence, what we see is either when they see the woman change, they have two options. They join them or they just bunk out. And most of the women, when they learn the possibilities that they have of growth, of dreams, start somehow having the empowerment to say no. And so a lot of them end up leaving the violence that they live in. But at the same time, we see the children of these women start to respect their mothers. And I remember one telling me when she was coming to the graduation, she said, what's really amazes me about having gone through this program is that my child, who used to not do anything for me, he would sit around and be nasty to me, is now saying, Mom, I have to help you wash the dishes just because you're learning at the same rate I am. And so it's the question of respect. Once there is a respect in the household, it's a respect that grows. And the women start changing that around them. And Latin women have a tendency to protect the men. I mean, it's a question of the men are untouchable. So they're perfect, they don't do anything. And sort of kind of create this level of violence, and it's a circle. And so we're trying to teach them, stop, do something different, stop your violence. And it's working. And I think if we can replicate this, I don't think the violence women live with has anything to do with a space or a place. And you don't have to be Latin or Indian or American to live the violence that happens in households. And it's very quiet. I never expected to see what I saw in terms of even prostitution of children. I mean, I had no idea what I was getting into, and it's this Aspen network thing that got me into this.
It's a shady place, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask each of you quickly, since I didn't do too elaborate an introduction, instead of giving a kind of theoretical summary of what you do, if you can give me an example of the person you've served, that kind of story of a person you've served through what you do, that kind of embodies the kind of user experience of it, and something you're most proud of, starting with you, Amit.
Well, Aspire's trained over 60,000 students, but let me go to some lives. So let's say there's a guy called Surinder who lives 200 kilometers north of New Delhi. So this is the kind of family we would address. Here's a family of 4 where the father just retired, had a salary of just $200 a month, has now a pension of about $25 a month. So in $25 a month, there's a family of 4 living. Surinder graduated from one of these government colleges, but is unemployed, can't get a job. He speaks few words in English, but cannot speak proper English, is unemployable. So we get this guy into our academy. We put him through a 4 to 5 months boot camp whenever they're. In this boot camp, they'll learn English language, they'll learn behavioral skill, they'll learn either customer service or sales or a little bit accounting, And after that soft skills rounding up, when we believe they're ready for that last mile, we'll put them up for interviews with large companies. So in our early days, our biggest recruiters were still IBMs and Accentures and Wipros, who want in their outsourcing teams thousands and thousands of people. And now, Surinder, 4 years later, he continues to work at a leading multinational outsourcing. He himself has a salary of about $350. Now his sisters get educated. They are able to now move from a little shanty house to a one-room apartment, and we are able to dramatically impact that. I have, the other story I'm very proud of is, again, in my early days, I knew every person by name. Now that we are 60,000 graduates, but one of our first girl candidates was a girl called Shweta from Rewari, again about 100 kilometers north. In their village, women were not supposed to work. They were never supposed to work. So she was the first, and the reason she came to us was because in her own village, they wouldn't even allow her to train in the same institutions. So she and her mother would take a 50 miles journey every day, come to Gurgaon, where our institute is, train and go back. The mother would sit outside the office in the reception all day because she wouldn't trust. She wouldn't trust that there could be anyone who's just training for the sake of training, and they said they must be having some other agenda. after the training, she worked at a multinational. Eventually, she left the job after a few years, now is a teacher back in a school. And I think the fact that these are the lives and individual lives we touch. Now you start taking that, hey look, there are in 16 different states, about 25 different towns. When you start making this impact, you start proving to young people as well that meritocracy matters. So one of the big problems in India has been meritocracy has died. Students don't want to train, they want to buy a job because they believe everyone is corrupt. Employers don't want to train either. They want to say, hey, if I want to train, I'm going to charge for it. So they are mercenaries, and so there's a market failure.
Yeah.
So I think this is the problem we are solving, and through these lives of Shwetas and Surinders, we're trying to do employability training.
Hildegard, you?
I have many, but there's one who really had a personal impact on me. Her name is Carmela. Carmela came to us after having started prostituting herself when she was 5. Her mother is a Kuna Indian who comes from the Kuna Islands, and her mother was prostituting herself, and they didn't have enough money to even feed them. So she realized that if she went to the car wash and let the men come and touch her, she would get $5 to eat that day. And so she learned that pretty easily at the early age, that was a solution to her problems. From then, she moved on into a violent relationship, which moved her out of the town she was in and out of the shanty town where she lived in, into a marriage where she was pregnant 3 times and she got beat up the 3 times while pregnant. Last time, he tried to run her over with a car. And so she decided to flee this relationship. To get back to Panama City, she went to a bus station, and when she got to the bus station with her 3 children to get a ride back, she didn't have a cent in her pocket. So she asked the bus driver to drive her back, and the bus driver said, okay, leave the kids in this bar and come over and we'll do it in the bus, and I'll drive you back. So that's the way she came back to the same shanty town she had left. And then she found us. And from there on, she now has a healthy relationship with a man that actually takes care of her 3 kids. She's working in a hotel, and she's starting to see the light in her life. It's not easy to give light to these women. It's not easy for them when the economy or the industry, because we work with the hotel industry, is not nice to them. They give them a job, 3 months later, they bring them back. But Carmela is succeeding, and Carmela has even asked me to tell her story, just because she wants other women out there. And she's not an exception, she's the rule. When I say that we had found violence in normal, urban women that we find off the street, the way we actually bring them into the program, we have women that participate in the program, go to the streets with pamphlets, and ask other women in the street to come and join the program. It's actually a give back process where you are supposed to bring 5 women back that day, signed off, they're going to participate. So it's a way we bring them in. And so Carmela walked in that way, and so do all the women. I never thought that the urban environment could create this level of disengagement.
Bill, you?
Amit's point about knowing, I used to know all of your clients. I think when Peter, when we were in the Crown Fellows, started in the Fellows program, the Hope Credit Union was around 800 members and about $200,000 in assets. Today we're about 30,000 members and 160 million in assets. The Crown program really inspired me to use that vehicle to leverage it up to serve a lot more people, and all along the way there's been just so many people who've inspired me and motivated me to continue to push. I think about all of the people after Katrina who were all of a sudden homeless and didn't have a bank account but needed an account in order to get their FEMA check or to get an insurance check, and were outside the banking system, that we were able to help, and how so many Crown Fellows came down and assisted and directed food and supplies and helped us rebuild the community. I think of a woman named Gloria who's was had taken out a payday loan to help pay for her daughter's nursing school education. And next thing she knows, she's owing $160 every 2 weeks in interest and fees. We were able to restructure that loan so she ended up owing $120 in interest over the life of the loan, and get her out of a debt cycle, a debt trap that was just dragging her into a deep hole. I think about a woman who recently came to us. She had moved from the house that she owned previously. She owned the home, but there was a murder next door, and like any of us, she was concerned for her family and moved. She wasn't able to keep up the payments on the house, so the house went into default, and she created problems on her credit, and she went into bankruptcy. Well, she came to us recently wanting to buy a house, and no other mortgage lender would consider her case. Very few low-income families are able to get a first-time mortgage these days. The mortgage crisis has really tightened credit and moved institutions away from many communities. But she came to us, and our lender was able to talk to her, go to the newspaper and document what had happened, look at the police reports, and see that before she had defaulted on the loan, she had never missed a payment. She had taken good care of her home, and so we were able to manually underwrite that loan. Instead of putting her into a computer program, into a formula, and treating her like a number, we were able to look at her situation and actually get her back in a home so that she can get her family stable and moving in the right direction.
It's remarkable. Amit, I wanted to ask you about one of the debates in many developing countries is how do we kind of balance the trade-off, to the extent that there is one, between emphasizing vocational education, making people employable and productive economically as quickly as possible, versus cultivating liberal arts and people who have a more capacious understanding of good society, maybe are more educated in a variety of fields. And if you look at a place like India and many other countries, they suffer from both of these lacks. And each reinforces the other. People are corrupt in some ways because they don't have the kind of enlightened understanding of things that you might get from a different kind of education. So you're pushing vocational. How do you think about the need to also do that other part? If India only does vocational, I imagine that could be a society that has its own dysfunctions and problems.
Well, the truth is, India today does so little vocational. India does 8% of youth coming out of India are really vocationally trained. When even in Western Europe, in Germany and Switzerland, that number would be 50-60%, or in a country like South Korea, that's 80%. So India does very little. But really, the focus has come in because India is an old civilization, and we've had a caste system forever. And in the four castes, clearly the top caste, the Brahmins as we would call it, everyone aspires, to be really having the second degree and third degree and reaching the top. And India aspires to be a knowledge economy. So it's hard to keep the focus on the blue-collared, or as we're calling a whole new layer of gray-collared workers emerging in India. I think India's long-term, really emancipation will come from not either focusing on the higher education and really the knowledge economy only, or just focused on, it's going to be, we'll have to let a million flowers bloom. We'll have to have individual aspirations play, and people are going to move from one level to another in phases. Some of these people, India still has about 27% illiteracy. There's a fair amount of people in India who are out just breaking stones on the road. They are not going to immediately get to any higher order, and it's going to take at least a generation or two before we move them. So I think what Aspire is trying to do, clearly we are trying to focus mostly on what we call gray-collared workers, people with some literacy who can join the large armies of outsourcing, corporations, a whole new genre of companies India has created. We are also trying to focus on blue-collared workers in hotel industry, in hospital industry. We're we're also now trying to do a little bit, a tiny sliver of white collar workers, because we're running into people in rural areas with aspirations of, I want to be a banker. Every second child, who's done any kind of schooling now wants to be an IT programmer in India, because everyone's heard, now how do you deal with those aspirations? So we are trying to find, okay, here are people who are qualified, who can good. So I think India is neatly creating once again the caste system without the, all the fetters of how you couldn't jump between. So our education system.
Caste by merit.
Yeah, so by merit. And you can move between these streams. You can move from vocational to academic stream and back. And I think we also aspires working with Government of India to influence that lawmaking on how people are going to make. But clearly India is going to need all of this.
Yeah.
As the numbers are large.
So Hildegard, then Bill, for the last question, and we'll open it up to all of you. One of the things that it often strikes me we don't talk as much about in some of the seminars and readings, which I think is a kind of slightly Western bias, is whenever we read about morality, there's very little discussion of kind of our immediate families and communities as the unit of moral action. There's a lot about saving the world, which is what the whole point of the fellowship is. But I wonder, in your personal lives, when you have such a cause that you could give everything to, a cause that infinitely would demand your attention, women like Carmela, whose you just want to devote any minute you had to helping, how do you balance that with being there for your families, being not ending up someone like Gandhi, who was kind of good for India, good for the world, and not a great father, husband, or family man by any stretch?
Somebody asked me last week, we had a meeting of the Panama Fellows, actually Monday, and so one of the questions is, do you go into politics? Because the moment, it's hard. You get involved in this whole fellowship, and you start seeing the issues, and the issues just get bigger. They never get smaller, and you can't stop. So it's like this growing monster where your life is starting to seem like you have not enough time, and so politics becomes a question. Is would you? And my answer was yes. Once I've had my children grow enough so that they know that their mother is going to be there for them, but at the same time, I see how this affects my own immediate family very deeply. I have 3 daughters. The oldest one is 12, and she thinks of me as a perfect hero. And so, when she had to write at school an essay on somebody who has never stopped and has been very straightforward, her hero was her mother. And so I get this essay back with a grade, and I see it, and it just blew me, because I realized that I wasn't only leading by example in my community, I was leading by example in my own kids, who now have this incredibly high aspirations, which are going to make them so different from anything else they have around, which makes them hard even at school. I mean, my kids are different. And do I mind that? No. It's made my family closer instead of more separate. It's made us, and my husband is such gung-ho about, what I do with the women. I was talking to him before coming here. I'm like, so what am I going to talk about? He's like, just talk about you and what you do. I mean, I've seen what you do. I believe in what you do. And so, it's the whole family becomes part of the growth. My kids know about the foundation. They go to it. They do, they go dance. We have a dance program with, a leadership program with kids. They go dance with the kids. And so it's become a thing. Aspen affects not only you, but everything else, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Bill, how do you, with such a cause that you're involved in, when you have that marginal hour to spend, how do you decide whether to spend it on the cause or the people closest to you?
It's been interesting, and I think the Fellows Program has helped me to step back and try to put my work into perspective. Being around others who care passionately about making a difference, and who have taken time to consult with me about the importance of striking a balance. I was dead set on being the next Thurgood Marshall. I don't know how I got into banking, but I grew up in a family that both my parents moved from North Carolina to New York, part of the Northern migration to make a better life for their kids. But when New York was a bit much, when me and my sisters were born, we decided to move back to North Carolina. But I moved back to a town called Bynum, North Carolina, that was actually named for the people who owned my ancestors. Every Friday night, there would be a Ku Klux Klan meeting about 100 yards down the road from where we grew up. And it made an impression on me as a kid. So,
Master of understatement.
and so it's hard to get, and then I moved from North Carolina to Mississippi, which is ground zero for the civil rights movement. And it's really hard to separate my life from the realities that my family, the people around me live. But striking that balance is important, and I've got a daughter who graduates on Mother's Day from Duke, and she surprised the heck out of me and told me that she's going to, she just got a full academic scholarship to the University of Mississippi Medical School, and she said she wants to practice medicine in the Mississippi Delta, which just blew me away.
Wow.
So I think.
Sounds like all of you are breaking that trade-off, which many people
Yeah,
don't
but
succeed in.
you know, so you want to see a better life for your children, and I think we've struck that balance. And for some reason, she's going to I think continue probably following her mother's lead more than mine of giving back and helping others around her. But I think none of us live on an island, and we are part of the communities that we exist within. And I think we're fooling ourselves if we don't see the connection and do everything we can to chart a path so that everyone can take advantage of the things that we take for granted. We all want a good home, a safe community for our families, and low-income people. They are brilliant. They are not stupid. They lack the tools that many of us have access to, and so I think it's in my interest, it's in my daughter's interest to make sure that we do everything to give people the tools they need to succeed and to contribute to society.
Well, thank you. How about a hand for our panel? Doing remarkable work. And now I can't imagine that people don't have questions for them, so fire away. Or maybe I can imagine people don't have questions for them.
We'll get a microphone to you.
Hildegard, what was it, to follow up on the personal story, how did you grow up? What was your driving force? Did this just come to you after school and you're doing your architecture, you thought, and you saw the world, what was happening? Or what was your inspiration? All of you were really inspiring.
Well, I have to mention two things. One, I grew up with a grandfather who came from Switzerland before the war. They were poor farmers, and he ended up in Panama. And I grew up going to his house on the farm every summer, seeing my grandfather with a line of people of about 25 each Saturday who would stand up in line to get a loan or some money to help them with solve a problem. So that's something that stayed in my head. And then I studied architecture here. I came back to Panama, moved into the old city, married a guy who loved the old city as much as I did. And so there I was doing all this restoration architecture work. Wonderful. I was feeling great. I was building everything I wanted to build. And then I went to a meeting. UNESCO had just declared Panama World Heritage Site. So one of the things that the new thing, a new trend, was human heritage. And so this meeting was, let's talk about the human heritage. And so there I go, very successful. I sit on a table, 10 people, and I go, restoration's great, I'm doing fine, I'm making money, and blah, blah, blah. And so this lady, because we were entrepreneurs, people who lived there, the whole thing, stands up and says, well, for me, it's doing horribly. And so I looked at her, and I couldn't understand where she was coming from. And she said, well, about 2 weeks ago, the owner of the house where I live in, I'm a seamstress, took the roof away of the house. And it rained that night. And I lost everything. I lost my home, and I lost my job. So I was left with nothing. And as I was hearing her, I knew the guy who had done this. And it was like, you know, I had a knife on my chest. The whole thing kind of collapsed on me in 5 seconds. And I walked out of there. I got home and I said, I can't do this. I can't be doing success without anything. And so I came up with the idea of the program that was really not successful at all. At the beginning, I thought I'd train them, close the cycle of poverty, and they would, you know, get a job. And 20% of them were getting jobs. The rest were going home, and nothing was happening. So then Aspen came along, and I realized I needed a group of people. I couldn't do it on my own. So I recreated my board. I brought in a lot of people with passion. We sat for a year thinking what this program would look like, and came up with the idea basically based on empowerment. It's a 7-week course, 5 of which are empowerment. They come in every day as a job from 8 to 5. They have to wear a new uniform that changes every time. And they have to clean the rooms, they have to take control of the situation, and they have to show up. If they don't show up, they're out. And so in the end, what has brought to me personally is the same amount of growth that it brings to them. And that's the beauty. For anybody who participates in the program, it's not only that you help others, you help yourself help others. I'm a different person than I was before I started this.
Oh, it's a privilege to hear you speak, Hildegard.
Thank you.
I have a question for you about the financing of your projects, because you mentioned that just briefly. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
It cost us $1,056 per woman for training. And normally what we do is we have corporate donors, we have some US government financing, we do a lot of grant writing, and thus we get grants. We train 150 women a year, and we're always struggling with financing. It's not easy, but thank God it's a sexy project, like somebody told me. And so in a way, when I started this, I remember one of the first programs, I didn't have the money to finish the program. And you know, I was like, either I go on it or not. So we have a budget of about $350,000 a year that we have to fill in, and we're coming with ideas every year. We have a board, a finance board that meets young people. That's great. I have real estate agents, I have bankers, I have architects. I just had this other new guy join the board that knows a lot of people. So hopefully, yeah, we're looking into growth. And growth means money. And so you need to trust that what you're doing is going to have the right effect. I was telling Peter this morning, when I started the program, I had $12,000 in the bank account. And, and I hired a guy, which I couldn't pay for, and I told him, okay, the only thing you're going to do is, end of the year, you're going to have the same money you have in the bank account. I don't know what we're doing. End of the year, we had doubled that, because the results speak for themselves. We have 74% of our women are working today.
That's great.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Yeah.
Thank you. For Bill, how did you grow your establishment from what you mentioned, you know, you're starting out and the success that you've had? How did you achieve that? Was it a public-private working together, or was it just strictly sort of entrepreneurial?
It was entrepreneurial, a lot of tape and bubble gum, but we decided on the credit union model because we felt philosophically it fit better. It's community owned by the members, and the revenues go back to provide affordable rates and higher returns to the members instead of a few wealthy shareholders, which we felt was consistent with what we were hoping to promote. But we've grown quite rapidly. We had not intended on growing quite as fast. After Katrina, though, the need was there, and we felt an obligation to respond. And so we did. We were the fastest growing credit union in the nation in terms of the rate of membership growth from 04 to 05, the year after Katrina, then the rate of asset growth because of a lot of support from people around the country, a lot of it within the Aspen network. But ultimately, the regulators are going to require that your capital grows, and so we can't go out and sell stock the way a traditional bank can. We're currently in the process of going around the country because there's not as much philanthropy in the Mid-South. There's not as much, we don't have the mega banks that invest in community development in the way they do in other parts of the country. So we're currently embarking on a Friends of Hope campaign to raise contributions and capital to expand. We want to double the number of people in places that we serve over the next 3 to 4 years in response to what we're seeing as an emergence of bank deserts across the Mid-South. But we do generate internal earnings to support core operation, but we're, as with any company, as you grow, you need capital to grow. And so we're trying to raise donations to support our growth. 20 million is what we.
So if you guys know anyone.
We think that over the next 3 years we can serve. Since the recession, we've made 7,200 loans, about $260 million, as banks have really retrenched. We've seen our demand grow each year. We think we can make $500 million in loans to underserved communities over the next 4 to 5 years if we're able to attract those resources. Before we wrap up, I do want to take the liberty of just saying how much of a gift the Aspen Institute has given us. This Fellows Program has introduced, me to a network of friends and consultants that have been invaluable. When things get tough, they're there and really provide a shoulder and a kick in the butt when you need it, which is really great. And also to the McNulty family for shining a light on the Fellows Network. It really has been incredibly humbling to be a finalist for the award and to be introduced to the people who have been a part of this effort. So thank you, Ann.
So how about a hand for Ann and the fellowship and our wonderful panelists. Thank you all so much for your questions. And thank you guys.